Welcome to New Teacher Talk. My name is Ken King. I am an education professor at Aurora University in Aurora, Illinois. Does repetition really help us master new information? It's a question I raise often when teaching a course on learning theories. I like to begin that course with a simple classroom activity, one that gets people thinking. I give students a series of true or false statements and ask them to show agreement or disagreement by moving across the room toward a sign that reads either true or false. One statement always catches people off guard. Repetition alone will produce mastery of new information. And more often than not, the majority of students get it wrong. It's a bit of a surprise, sometimes even unsettling, because repetition is a strategy many of us have used and relied on for years. Today I'm going to share why repetition alone is not enough, and more importantly, offer you 4 powerful strategies that actually work. These approaches are backed by brain science and can help you or your students learn more effectively and retain information longer. Let's start by considering why repetition alone is not enough. When students simply repeat information, for example, rereading notes or drilling facts, they're often relying on short-term rehearsal rather than meaningful encoding. The brain's working memory has limited capacity and duration, just a few items or just a few seconds. Consider the number of locker combinations, the times you repeated how to spell a word before writing it down, or a list of things you planned to buy but forgot to. All of these examples were learned briefly and then immediately forgotten, sometimes before you were able to use the information you needed. This illustrates the ethereal nature of working memory. For information to be retained and usable later, it must be actively processed and meaningfully connected with existing knowledge. This stage is not passive. It requires the learner to analyze, organize, and relate the new information to what they already understand. When we organize new information, such as by categorizing it, creating mental images, making comparisons, or generating examples, we enhance the likelihood that it will be transferred from working memory into long-term memory. The sophistication of a learner's existing knowledge plays a crucial role here. The more developed and interconnected a student's prior understanding, the easier it is to interpret new ideas, to detect patterns, and to anchor unfamiliar content to familiar mental structures. In other words, new information doesn't enter an empty mind, it fits into a growing framework. This is why building background knowledge and activating prior learning are so important in instruction. Some effective strategies that support integration include making analogies or comparisons. For instance, comparing the circulatory system to a road network, asking how and why questions to deepen analysis, creating concept maps to visualize relationships among ideas, rephrasing information in one's own words to support elaboration, using storytelling or narratives to make abstract content more memorable, and teaching others or explaining concepts aloud, which forces deeper processing. By engaging in these types of elaborative thinking, learners move beyond surface-level exposure and begin to build lasting, retrievable mental representations, strengthening their capacity to use knowledge flexibly in the future. Furthermore, rote repetition often leads to what's known as the fluency illusion, a cognitive trap where students mistake familiarity for true understanding. When learners repeatedly read or rehearse the same material without engaging in deeper processing, the content begins to feel easier and more recognizable. This sense of ease gives the illusion that they have mastered the material, when in reality, they may not be able to apply it to a new context, explain it properly, or retrieve it without cues or prompts. For example, a student might read their notes on the water cycle several times and feel confident that they know it, simply because the words look and sound familiar. However, if asked to describe the process in their own words or explain why condensation happens, they may struggle, revealing that true understanding has not taken place. This illusion is especially dangerous because it can lead to overconfidence, under-preparation, and gaps in performance during assessments or real-world problem-solving. Students may believe that they do not have to practice when, in fact, they haven't developed flexible or usable knowledge. So the key takeaway: learning that sticks involves effortful, meaningful processing, not just repetition. Rote practice and memorization does not lead to rich and meaningful understanding and may mislead you in recognizing how much you really do understand. Let's consider now some strategies that support long-term learning. These strategies enhance encoding, promote retrieval, and strengthen memory consolidation, especially when linked with elaboration, the process of connecting new information to what you already understand. Retrieval practice is a strategy in which you actively recall information from memory. It is a form of self-testing as a study strategy. Let's consider an example of this. A student is learning about photosynthesis. After reading a passage about photosynthesis, a student closes their notebook and writes down everything they remember. They then check for accuracy and fill in the gaps in recall and understanding. This immediately puts the new information you learned to work by restating the new concepts in your own words. It also requires you to use your newly achieved understanding as a foundation by adding the missed information afterwards. This works by strengthening neural pathways for accessing information. When you retrieve a memory, neurons that represent the parts of that memory fire together. This repeated activation strengthens the synaptic connections between those neurons. This makes memory easier to recall in the future. Another strategy is called spaced repetition. This has to do with how often we revisit content. Spaced repetition is a study technique where information is reviewed at increasing intervals of time. The goal is to review information before it's forgotten, strengthening memory and improving long-term retention. It's essentially the opposite of cramming. For example, a teacher may help students by reviewing key vocabulary from a unit every few days, or using mini quizzes instead of cramming before a test. Here's a sample timeline of possible actions. On day 1, study the material. On day 2 or 3, quiz yourself without notes. By day 5, try it again. If you recall most of it, increase the gap before the next review. Week 2, use retrieval tasks such as explain it to someone else, sketch a diagram or a timeline, test yourself again. At the point of 1 month, summarize or apply the information in a new context. From a brain science perspective, each time you recall information after a delay, your brain reactivates the neural pathways where that memory is stored. It interrupts the potential to forget information. This process strengthens the connections between neurons, making it easier to recall the information in the future and helping to transfer it from short-term to long-term memory. Elaboration is an essential practice in building memories. Elaboration means that you expand on new information by connecting it to existing knowledge. Consider an example of the concept of photosynthesis. Instead of just memorizing the definition, the student creates a connection to the ideas that they already have. They might write it down and create something like this statement. Photosynthesis reminds me of how solar panels work. Just like solar panels capture sunlight to generate energy for a house, leaves capture sunlight to make energy for the plant. I also know that plants take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen, so it's like they're cleaning the air while making their own food. According to neuroscience, elaboration strengthens learning by physically changing the brain. When students connect new ideas to what they already know, it activates networks of neurons. Repeated activation strengthens these connections, a process called synaptic plasticity, which helps move information into long-term memory and improves future recall. Interleaving is a practice strategy that may seem counterintuitive at first, as it goes against what many consider to be common sense learning. Rather than focusing on one type of problem at a time, interleaving involves mixing different types of problems or topics during practice. For example, in a math lesson, instead of giving students 10 perimeter problems in a row, you might provide a mixed set that includes problems on area, perimeter, and volume. This approach encourages flexible thinking and helps students learn to distinguish between similar but distinct concepts. From a brain science perspective, interleaving works because it forces the brain to switch and compare, requiring learners to discriminate among concepts and apply knowledge in varied contexts. These frequent shifts demand deeper processing, which strengthens and reinforces neural pathways through repeated meaningful activation. Over time, this leads to stronger, more interconnected memory networks, supporting both long-term retention and transfer learning to new situations. These 4 strategies will provide you with a set of new and flexible tools to help you make your study and review time more effective. You may want to look into other strategies, such as dual coding, using concrete examples to model abstract ideas, and engage in metacognition, where you reflect on how you constructed your new ideas. By moving beyond repetition and instead using strategies that engage meaning, encourage recall, and strengthen connections, teachers can help students store information in long-term memory and actually use it later. Thank you for listening. I hope you become a regular follower of this podcast channel. And remember, as a new teacher, we are here to help.